There are approximately 167 indigenous languages in the United States. That number is expected to dwindle to only 20 languages by 2050.
There is a worldwide effort to preserve and protect and revitalize indigenous languages. They're endangered all over the world.
The Sam Noble Museum of Natural History received a $350,000 grant to digitize the nearly 1,300 languages represented in their collection.
You know, right now, if you want to access these materials, you have to show up here to the Sam Noble and come to this library in person. And just for a lot of people, like, you can't make the trip.
Digital access to the languages allows people all over the world to hear and learn languages donated to the Sam Noble Museum, many of which are native to America's First Nations.
Between my predecessors' relationships with tribes and my relationships with people in tribal language departments, you know, we've had pretty good Oklahoma representation.
The museum also preserves languages from tribes outside of Oklahoma. One of the board members of the Sam Noble Museum is the director of Wajaji Ia Owansi, better known as the Osage Nation Language Department.
If you can say the first number in Osage, which is Winksay. If you can say Winksay, you can say about anything in the Osage language.
Van Bighorse is talking about Winksay's guttural sound, which tends to scare Wajaji Ia learners like me.
Our language is vital. It's vital of who we are as a people, a unique people.
The Wajaji Nikashi is not the only nation with this message.
There's a lot about identity.
I'm very culturally ingrained. I was raised that way. Jeremy and Delaney have made extra efforts.
Some people may feel discouraged about the language because they hear the old ones speaking and they think, well, it's just for them.
The Seminole Language Department is working to make those extra efforts easier to get younger generations involved.
And it's a 5-year project which will get about 60 picture books into our libraries for our Head Start and then our child care program.
The Seminole Nation's language is part of the Muskogean language family.
Like the Choctaws and Chickasaws, their language is almost the same. But there were some small differences that allowed them to gain their own identities as tribes. Same way with the Creeks and Seminoles, Alabama Coshada.
I can speak Chickasaw, I can read and understand Choctaw, but I can't really speak it very well. Like if someone's talking to me in Quasati or Alabama, I could say like, yeah, they're talking about an animal story.
Though the languages are similar, there are differences that make each tribe unique. One thing all tribes have in common, the first language speakers are running out of time to share their knowledge.
We've lost 11 native speakers since March of 2020. And on Wednesday, we lost Pauline Carpenter Brown, who was 90.
The Chickasaw Nation has 30 first language speakers ranging from their late 60s to mid-90s. As with other tribal nations, there is a generational gap between first and second language speakers.
Forced assimilation, boarding schools, challenges with like a grandparent, a great-grandparent generation, they experienced so much prejudice. In many cases, they put the language away in the family because they didn't want their children to suffer.
So there's a lot of Cheyennes out there here in Oklahoma, but Arapaho, we haven't identified any in the past 5 to 6 years.
Cheyenne and Arapaho's language department isn't just preserving one language, but two. Their Master Apprentice program is ramping up the number of Cheyenne or Arapaho speakers.
The whole goal of that is to learn the language, and that's all they do when they're in session, and that's all that they speak and they understand.
I was a part of a Master Apprentice program here for Seminole Nation. A lot of self-taught, but then just being around speakers in the language and other language learners, it's a big benefit.
One of those first language speakers is Seminole Nation's Language Department Director Edwin Marshall.
A diphthong sound of THL, that sounds not heard in the English language. Now, if you look at the Cherokee alphabet, the syllabary, what they call, I can't make heads or tails of that, but they've learned.
It helped us so much that I think in large measure the reason I'm even here today, or the reason we even have a Cherokee Nation that's still here, is because of Sequoia Why? Because he allowed us to communicate with ourselves in a way that we hadn't before, in writing.
Under Principal Chief Hoskins' administration, the Cherokee Nation has dedicated $16 million per year to language programs, including a fluent language village.
What you'll see in about a year is elders living next door to these little kids going to the immersion school, and you can just imagine the interaction that can happen.
The $18 million Durbin Feeling Language Center, which is currently being built, will house all of Cherokee Nation's language programs. The Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes started to take on a more traditional approach to learning the language 4 years ago.
We didn't want to write it down anymore because we want to learn this the real way, and it has worked. It's been working for us.
The Citizen Potawatomi Nation has their own way of getting citizens listening to and learning Potawatomi.
Public domain films, basically the ones that are from the 30s, 40s, or if they didn't renew the copyrights, they're now able to be redone in any language you want.
Citizen Potawatomi families can enjoy classic cartoons and books with a QR code for kids to listen to the language as they read it. Similarly, the Osage Nation has a children's book in the works, as well as a virtual reality game to see the Wajaji words from the items you see in the scenes. And Cheyenne and Arapaho are about to launch their dual language app. Many nations, many languages, and many exciting developments to come. As for the languages themselves, the Citizen Potawatomi Nation's Language Department Director Justin Neely says in part,
I ask that, that to give help to our children so they can pick up this language, pick up these traditional ways.
There was a prophecy that when the last speaker of Chickasaw dies, the world would end. It's not scary for me, but it's motivating.